Hey guys, Rachel from Past Building Consultants here. Today's topic is looking at the documentation that SDA assessors are going to be needing at final inspection stage in order for them to issue their documentation so that SDA providers can register or enroll the SDA dwelling. There is quite a lot of documentation, however, most of it is normal run-of-the-mill documentation that builders and providers, who are often one and the same thing, are going to be needing anyway. So obviously it depends on whether you're dealing with the builder or the provider, but communication needs to happen as to who's going to provide it and ensuring that everybody knows exactly what is going to be needed before, ideally, you actually go and do your final inspection so that there are no delays. Firstly, if the SDA assessor who's doing the final inspection and preparing the final documentation isn't the same assessor that did the preliminary design stage documentation, then of course it's a really good idea to make sure that the SDA assessor who is going to be finalising the project has got access to what the original assessor signed off on a preliminary stage. And obviously with COVID, it's quite often the case that you may not have the same assessor for both at the moment. Assessors do collaborate and work together. Obviously it's probably better in some ways to have the same assessor at both design stage and completion stage, because they'll be extremely familiar with the project at final stage and throughout the project. If you engage them to do that as well and do additional inspections, they will be more familiar with it. But at the very least, make sure that the SDA assessor who's taking over and doing the final has got access to what was originally approved, because you may be surprised at what they might pick up. We're all learning about SDA and we've all got different backgrounds as SDA assessors, and I know that I look at it from sort of a building surveyor's perspective and investor's perspective. I've worked in the building industry in technical roles for over 30 years, and I know my way around a plan and how to read dimensions and where dimensions are taken from. That's not necessarily the case for all assessors. That's not to say they can't read plans, because they can, but I will pick up on things immediately, whereas someone else might look at dimension and not realise perhaps that the dimension isn't actually taken to the correct point, and therefore that can compromise certain things like clear widths. So we all have our different strengths and weaknesses as assessors because we have different backgrounds. So again, if you've got assessors who are involved at different stages, you're kind of getting a bit of peer review as well, and also it will mean that the assessor going through at final inspection stage isn't going in cold and has familiarised himself with the project and what has already been agreed. And as I say, a bit of peer review can happen, and potentially they can pick up issues that might have been missed or might cause a problem down the track, or that might be a bit too close to call. And that's a good thing too, because then at least if something is raised at an early opportunity, then there is the potential that the project can be adapted on site if necessary, and obviously the builder and the provider will determine if that's appropriate or not, but at least they can kind of alert you to potential problems and get them resolved as early on as possible. So having access to the original assessor's documentation is really useful. Also, as you're approaching the final inspection, don't leave everything to the last minute. If you possibly can, at least be prepared. Maybe have a spreadsheet together of all the documentation that you're going to need, so that you can chase up the different contractors and your suppliers and what have you, to make sure that they send it through in a timely manner so that nobody's waiting and you're having troubles issuing and enrolling your dwelling because you're waiting for documentation to arrive. So one of the first things that they're going to be looking for are the final as constructed plans. So please send your assessor the final as constructed plans, which may of course be very different to what was approved at the design preliminary assessment stage. Because what we have to do is we actually have to itemise every single drawing number on our assessment sheets, and that gets submitted. So they will need to see that. They will also need the Form 11 or the certificate of occupancy from the building certifier, and also the final inspection certificate, the Form 16, is good to have as well, so that the assessor knows that the building inspector has been through and done his final and is happy with the building. Next comes the Form 16s and Form 15s. There may be several of these from the engineer, for example, in terms of your hoist provision, if you're going high physical support, and whether the structure is suitable for putting in a hoist at a later date if necessary, and that's you require a Form 15 for the design, but also Form 16 to make sure that he's actually inspected that and seen it, the strengthening in place as well. The electrician is a big one as well, because obviously having power backup and also where it goes to is really important. Making sure that the electrician has installed everything correctly is a big one for SDA. And the other one would be things like slip resistance. So from your suppliers or installers, making sure that you've got your Form 15s and 16s for the appropriate slip resistance of things like tiles, vinyl, and even things like painted treatments to decks to make sure that they meet the appropriate slip resistance. Another thing which can get forgotten is the evacuation plan. So although it doesn't really specify in the SDA standards what constitutes an evacuation plan and what needs to be in it, the SDA assessor needs to be assured that the participant and their carers have been provided with an evacuation plan at completion stage. So if you're not familiar with what one of those is, maybe go and research evacuation plans, speak to the participants or the providers, and have a chat about who's going to prepare the evacuation plan, to what level of detail it needs to go to, is it appropriate for the participants, whether that may need updating, and make sure that that's in place. Because whilst the SDA assessor doesn't really assess the detail as such, they have to be assured that one has been provided at the time of their inspection. Another thing that is worth covering is probably just a letter from the SDA provider, which should be on their headed paper with their provider number on it, and that's really just outlining some other bits and pieces that when it goes to the NDIS and is reviewed, it's just going to help them see that they've covered certain items, which, because there's so much documentation involved, might get lost, and you don't want them kind of querying really big ticket items such as whether fire sprinklers have been provided, or Wi-Fi and internet, for example, is another good one. So making sure that those things are covered in a general letter from the provider, just confirming that those have been installed in the property. Even things like just confirming that on-site overnight assistance has been provided, because those are the sorts of things that are going to affect the pricing, and it would just give them a sort of an easy reference to make sure that that has been confirmed as being included. So what will happen is, once the builder or the provider has provided the SDA assessor with all of that documentation, we then pull all that together and we highlight certain parts and we list drawing numbers, for example, and documentation that's been received, in order for the SDA assessor to do their part and submit their documentation, and in order for the SDA provider to then register and enroll the building under their part as well. So all of that documentation, if you can start thinking about that before you do your final inspection, is going to save you time and obviously hopefully save you a bit of money as well, and just kind of keep everybody more organised and on the ball. That's it for today, guys. If you've got anything you'd like me to cover, by all means reach out and let me know. If I can't help you with a particular issue that you might have a query with, then I will certainly find someone who can help. That's what we're here for, is to inform and help the SDA building process so that we can get more SDA out there which is of high quality and as quickly as possible, so that participants and their families have got far better SDA options, and we can supply the market with good quality accommodation where it's most needed. Thanks again, and I will speak to you soon. Cheers, bye.